Greetings, this is Antoinette Rootsdawtah, and you are listening to the podcast of Compassionate Las Vegas.
Welcome to Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast. I'm your host, Will Rucker, and I am excited for today's episode. We have such an amazing human joining the broadcast. You're going to be so inspired and leave feeling really hopeful. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Antoinette, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
I just absolutely adore you and Pato and the work that you do. And I will never forget the first time I heard you sing. You were at the piano, and it's just such an uplifting, warm, inspirational feeling that you transmit. And it's only been via Zoom, or at that time, it had only been via Zoom. I did get the privilege of seeing you live here in Las Vegas as well, which just amplified the experience. But I do want to start with this question, and we'll get to kind of more of the podcast questions. But what is it that drew you to music, and why do you think that when you share, it's so impactful?
Okay, I got into music because my parents had back in the 70s, we used to get $200 to go to Toys R Us for Christmas. So $200 in the 70s is a lot of money. So with the cart, you can kind of get a lot of toys and fill up that cart. Well, that year they said, would you rather have the $200 or get an organ? And the whole family voted to get an organ except for me. So I wanted the toys. So after they had gotten the organ and they all played with the organ for about a week, nobody touched that organ anymore. And it just sat there collecting dust. Since I didn't have any toys to play with, the only thing I could do was to jump on that organ and just kind of mess around and play with it. And that's what began my musical career at the age of 10, 12.
So it wasn't even something you set out to do. It just kind of happened.
Not at all. I didn't want to do it at all, but there was nothing else to do to pass the time but to create and write music. And my father was really impressed with the music that I was writing back then. He was always showing off to all of his friends. He's like, look what she wrote, look what she made up, look how creative she is and stuff.
Wow. Well, I feel like that's the way that life works. We end up exactly where we're supposed to be, sometimes whether we want to get there or not. And it sounds like that is your story.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast. And I want to hear from you. How do you define compassion?
Well, that's a very good question. So the music part of it, which actually leads into it, the reason why I do reggae music is specifically for a purpose. When you hear songs like reggae music, like Bob Marley, One God, One Aim, One Destiny, it was music with a purpose. I played rock and roll music, and I played jazz music, and I played classical music, and I did all these kinds of music, which always made me feel good. But I noticed that when I played reggae music, you actually can get people to sit there and hold hands with one another, all feeling like this kind of sense of love and unity and compassion and everything else. This is the one music that brings everybody together. I've witnessed it firsthand. It doesn't matter whether you're in Africa or in Asia or in South America. Everybody knows One Love. Everybody's heard Bob Marley sing One Love, and everybody does it despite their political backgrounds or their sexual backgrounds or whatever, or their racial backgrounds. It was one thing that brought everybody together, and I figured that was the music that I had to go into, was reggae music, because this was educational. It was uniting the people, and it was also spiritual at the same time. And it showed the compassion. It's like if we can't teach an old dog new tricks, then at least let's start with the youth, teaching them empathy and compassion and unity and love, because then those people grow up to be great human beings later, doctors and lawyers and politicians and different things. So if that's the way to influence people, I feel music is the way to actually do it, versus teachers and other leaders of authority that young people don't really want to listen to, but when they hear that song, they're all about it. It's like it could change the world. It can start revolutions, it can change society.
Well, I'm just thinking because you're right. And I have a similar background with the various genres. And there's something about the reggae music that people just, without even thinking about it, it's almost as if they open up and connect with each other. So that's thank you for sharing that because it definitely resonates with me. And you mentioned that this is something that transcends the geography. So you said a very special place, which is Africa. And it's special for a number of reasons. I have a particular affinity because we have a church ministry there, and we've done a lot of work in Ghana in particular. But Ubuntu, there's a new project happening. There's something that you're working on. Tell us a little bit about what Ubuntu means to you and the project that you are cooking up.
This project is like it's like the bucket list of bucket lists, of all time things. I've done everything. I've jumped out of airplanes. I've skydived. I've learned how to surf. I've did all sorts of different things. But getting back to my roots, and that's part of my name, Rootsdawtah. That name, I took that name specifically because I wasn't going to be Antoinette X, because I knew my last name was always the name of the slave owners who had owned us previously. So it's like connecting and finding that connection with your roots. This is really like my roots story, even though this is telling everybody else's story at the same time too. You remember roots back in the day. It's like going back to connect. It's like, that's how it feels every time I go to Africa. It's like finding your own history and finding your own connection to something that was lost and it was kind of like taken away, that you'd never been able to connect back with again. So every time going to Africa is like going home. Every time to each country that we're actually going to is like going home and seeing the familiarity within the people. So this project that we're doing, this Ubuntu documentary, is really to document the principles of Ubuntu. They may call it different names in different countries, but the name of it in South Africa is called Ubuntu. But the philosophy is very African throughout the whole entire continent. So we're going to 12 different countries, and we're interviewing dynamic leaders in each one of these countries who are exhibiting the principles of Ubuntu in their life, in their society, in their organizations, and the work that they do. And also with this project is also to exhibit how the Ubuntu philosophy is shaping and how progressive the world in Africa is, because it's a sleeping giant. You guys have no idea what's emerging and coming out of there, but also how it can shape how we move forward in the future of the rest of the world. The philosophy, the way we've been moving on that same materialistic age of I got mine, now you get yours. Philosophy, as you see, is we're destroying the planet, we're destroying each other. Nobody has any compassion or thought for the rest of humanity, let alone their brothers and sisters, whereas the Ubuntu philosophy includes everyone. Everyone can get theirs. Everyone can get ahead,
So what does that word mean?
It is I am because you are, because we are. So some people have different names, so each person that we interview, you're going to hear like their own unique expression. So for me, like some of them will sit there and say it means humanity. Some of them, it means dignity. Some of them, it means, loving service. So particularly, it means something unique and special to each individual. But in principle, it covers a whole lot of ground, and you can kind of see it in like, as I say, as society is changing and as Africa is growing and developing.
Yeah. And I actually think that you hit on one of the things that makes Africa so special is, well, a lot of folks still don't know it's a continent, not a country. And within that continent, each country has its own unique identity and way of being and way of expression. And I think Ubuntu does that as well, where you have this overarching spirit, but the way that it's expressed, the way that it's communicated, it varies from person to person, from place to place. And I think that if we just allowed humans to be human as they are, and accept and even stand in awe of their uniqueness, we would have a lot less prejudice and racism and sexism and all the isms. It's too many of them to name. But I think if we allow people that Ubuntu's freedom, then the world will be a better place.
I agree. I think this documentary is really history in the making. I haven't, we've searched and we've looked. We haven't seen any, we've seen other documentaries and other works that's been covering things that's going on in Africa. We've seen everything from the Congo, from the kids in the Congo to the oil spillage in Nigeria, to the Chinese, coming into these countries, all these different things. So there's a lot of positive, there's a lot of negative. There's a lot of different things, but what we're not seeing is the progress, and that's why we need someone to sit there and tell this story. And I'm so thankful, and it's being told by Africans, because the filmmaker, the director of the film, his name is Kudzai Tanago. He's from Tigzozo Media. They've been shooting documentaries already on different subjects, but the quality it's just astounding. The quality, the level of professionalism of how it's being shot, how it's being felt, because as we're traveling through to all these different countries, we're all experiencing the same thing, but in different ways. Because here's African diaspora of me as an American, African American, going back to my roots and knowing the history of slavery from here. And then as Pato, African diaspora, but his roots being Caribbean and being over in the UK, they've experienced totally different from how we've experienced. And then the Africans in Zimbabwe who are experiencing it differently from the Africans in each one of the countries that we're actually going to. So it's new, but it's still familiar to all of us. So it's almost like a memory plant just coming back or something. And then being able to see the future. It's like, wow. Wait till people see what's coming out of Africa.
Yeah, it's so many stories I could tell. Now, I don't want to bore our audience with my my trip down memory lane. And I think it's important to say, you mentioned that coming home, that feeling of finding a memory you didn't even know you had. That's exactly what happened the first time I set foot on the continent. It was as if I had come home, even though it was a place I had never been. And there's just something about it, the energy, the spirit, the way of life is something that I think you have to experience to really fully appreciate. And I think your documentary is going to bring some of that experience to this global audience. So I can't wait to see it. I think it's going to be phenomenal. And I know with you and Pato at the helm, it's really going to be quite the journey.
Thank you. I also want to encourage people because, you live in America and the diaspora is not just for Black people, diaspora all across the world. We got Black people in America, we got in the UK and South America, but also white people, brown people, Asian people, because we're seeing other foreigners are also traveling to the continent. Mm-hmm. What we're not seeing is more of our own people traveling to the continent. We're traveling to other places, like the Caribbean. But if you see what travel tour life in Africa is like, it is really unbelievable and outstanding. If you think, when you go to Rwanda, when you think of Rwanda, you're thinking of Hotel Rwanda. But if you go to Rwanda today, I'm telling you, it looks like Black Laguna Hills. It looks like Black Beverly Hills. It is not the same country. It is a country that is 64% run politically by women. These women have gone in there and have cleaned up and have set standards that is unbelievable. They're also the country that's exporting their first car out, from the continent. It's like, what's happening that is so underground that people don't know about. And I think if we just sit there and say, let's take a look, let's invest, or let's sit there and get our Black Star trade line going on, like Marcus Garvey was talking about. But either way, it's like, look towards the east. There's something shining great coming out of the continent and everybody's sleeping on it. But the world is changing as we're coming out of the pandemic. And, keep an eye out and keep an eye out for our documentary, because I'm telling you, it's going to get award after award after award. It's so spectacular.
Yeah, for sure. You brought to mind the subject that we started on before we started recording, which is restorative justice. Mm-hmm. And I think Ubuntu really is a key philosophy within actually doing restorative justice as a way of life in society. So tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing in that space.
Oh, that's a good question. One of the guys that we met I think this guy is a genius. He's in Burundi, and he's built a hospital, and he's building another hospital, but they built a hospital within the first year that he was there, when he was out there camping in his own hometown. Something he said dignity and restorative justice, it makes a lot of sense. He says these people who are picking their coffee at Starbucks, it's like, I've got the expensive iPhone. I know the kids are picking for pennies, that the materials used to make these iPhones. The same thing with Starbucks. It's like, what are they getting? They're getting pennies to sit there for us to pay for that $8 cup of coffee. So I think this is where we need to start hitting these guys up, because like I said, it's the investment. It's not like they keep making it seem like these Africans are begging for a handout. And it's like, no, wait a second, you've taken from them already, so if you're taking from them, allow them to be able to support themselves by paying them fair wages, so that's one of the things that you see is like free trade and restorative justice. I think we need to start going after them and sitting there saying, give these people fair wages. Because even when I was there, I was like, how much does it cost you to make these things? And that's part of the Marcus Garvey line that I'm sitting there trying to do with the Rootsdawtah Collective and with the Stand Up for Justice, is like, here we are, diaspora in America, in the UK, in the Caribbean, and in Africa as well, too. What the folks need, it's not like they're lazy. It's not like they're not working. It's not like they're just poor. It's like they are very rich, but someone else is taking all the money and someone else is benefiting from all of these things. Everybody can get an education. Everybody can have a decent future. Everybody can have a decent toilet. Everybody can have these things, and it doesn't cost any more than what they're already spending when they're spending all the money on something else. It's just all the rebranding, same thing like how we did in America, where we had defunding the police. Wasn't defunding, it was reshifting resources. So I believe Ubuntu philosophy and showing the world what it is, let's reshift these philosophies and reshift these resources, because if we're paying $8 a cup of coffee, then these kids should not have to be sitting there in the dirt without an education or pot to piss in or whatever else,
Absolutely.
Make it make sense.
And you keep saying, talking about this coffee, and I'm going to admit, I have not had my coffee for the day. And I'm just sitting here like, you know what? That sounds so delicious right now.
So good. It's so good. I'm telling you, that Burundi coffee and that Ethiopian coffee, but all the coffee that they're making and they're sending out to here, which we see the Starbucks in Europe, in America, and in Asia, and it's super expensive. It is so expensive. And it's like, it could be better. Things can be better.
Things could be better. And I think that is why I gravitate to compassion in the way that I do, is because I always use this example of, being on the inside of the club. I haven't quite made it in, to the club yet, but I at least made it past the fence so I can see inside. And I know that things can be so much better than they are for so many people. And I just really want people to hope again and to realize that better is possible. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you've lived in America your whole life and you've really bought into the propaganda that we receive as Americans, you do look down on African nations and other people, and you don't, unless you're intentional, unless you talk to someone like yourself, you don't understand the vast richness that different culture brings and the different way of being that is just as valuable and just as prosperous as what we aspire to with our dreams here in America. So you've touched on a lot, and I'm so grateful for our time together. And there's so much more we certainly could dive into, but we got to wait for the documentary for sure. But in our last few moments, would you just share what's on your heart for the world? What do you want to see?
Oh, what I would love to see is, I would love to see the spirit of Ubuntu. I mean, what I've been witnessing, the happiness in the village, the happiness that the people feel with each other. And when I was out there, I'm like, okay, it's rough. There's in this village, there's no toilets, there's no running water, there's none of those things. But everybody is so happy that you're happy too. It's like I actually could be out there with that hoe working all day long because everybody is singing and dancing the whole time. I mean, it's just fun. When you're doing it with other people, they just make work fun. When this woman is sitting there, you just see everybody just grab a chair and then take off and just go. And I was like, wow, how amazing is that everybody, it just doesn't even bother. It's like, all right, party's done. Everybody just picks up a chair and cleans up. You know, the same thing, the way the hospital was being built, they built it themselves. Those people learned how to make tiles. They're learning how to make buildings. Everybody's learning a skill or a trade. Each one is teaching another person. So I think what my hope for the world is that it's never too late, you know, even later in life, you know, to sit there and do something new, to do something different, to do something that could help another person, that could inspire another person, that could help another 10 people, potentially another 100 people. But I think that all of our lives have a specific purpose and mission, and it's just up to each individual to sit there and figure out what that actually is. They say in the Urantia book that you can do God's will in any earthly occupation. So it doesn't matter whatever job you do, you can always do God's will. You don't have to be a minister or preacher to do God's will and be ministerly or preacherly or whatever. You can do it as an accountant. You know, you could do anything spiritually and just kind of motivate and move humanity forward, you know, and then that way, when we die, we can sit there and say, at least I tried, you know, at least I tried to make the world a better place.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again for joining us on Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast. It is an absolute joy to speak with you, and I can't wait to hear new music and see the documentary and just be blessed by this contribution that, as you would say, you tried. And I think you've tried and made a huge impact. So thank you for that. And thank you to all of you tuning into the program. As I always remind you, you're not just a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. And what you do matters. So live compassionately. We'll see you next time.